Lady, I don't shake hands with people who buy their way into rooms like this.
Brad Harrington brushed her extended hand aside. Elena Maddox lowered it without a word.
Look around. These are executives, not charity cases pretending to be investors. Did you really think writing a few checks makes you one of us?
Elena gave no sign she had heard an insult at all. She remained composed.
Effective immediately, I am withdrawing my $750 million investment commitment to your company.
Brad Harrington had just insulted the one investor his company couldn't afford to lose. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The elevator smelled like money. That was the first thing Elena Maddox noticed. Cold air, expensive cologne, and the faint hum of a building that knew exactly what it was worth. She stood straight, shoulders back, her mother's pearls resting cool against her collarbone. The red dress was deliberate. The black blazer was armor. She didn't fidget. She never fidgeted. Floor 42, Matty said beside her, mostly to himself. He had his tablet tucked under one arm and his game face on. That careful, neutral expression he wore when he was paying attention to everything. Elena didn't respond. She was already inside the meeting. 8 months. That's how long her team had spent pulling apart Harrington Meridian Group's financials, stress testing their projections, flying to Chicago 3 separate times to walk the proposed development sites. $750 million doesn't move because someone asks nicely. It moves because you've done the work, checked every number twice, and decided the risk is worth taking. She had done all of that. She was ready. The elevator slowed, stopped. The doors slid open. The boardroom was straight ahead. Glass walls, city skyline behind it, 42nd floor sunlight cutting hard across a long mahogany table. 12 men sat around it. Mostly white, mostly over 50, mostly wearing the same navy suit in slightly different fits. At the far end, almost an afterthought, sat Judy Park, a board member Elena recognized from the company's annual report. And closer to the door, already watching Elena walk in, sat Emily Vander. Emily was the only one who stood. She was 67, silver-haired, and she rose from her chair with the quiet authority of someone who didn't need to make a show of having manners. She extended her hand. Ms. Maddox. Welcome. Mrs. Vander. Elena shook it firmly. Thank you. The rest of the room stayed seated. At the head of the table, Braden Harrington III was mid-laugh. A real laugh, full and easy, aimed at the man beside him. His CFO, round-faced, red-cheeked, clearly enjoying whatever the joke had been. Brad was 53, silver at the temples, built like a man who played tennis twice a week and expected everyone to notice. His suit probably cost more than most people's rent. He wore it like a second skin. He heard them come in. Elena watched him register it. The way the laugh didn't stop, exactly. But something behind his eyes recalibrated. He looked at her for just a half-second too long. Then he stood, smoothing his jacket, and walked toward them. Elena extended her hand. It was automatic, professional. The most basic thing two people do when they meet in a room like this. Brad looked at her hand. Not a glance. He actually looked at it. Like he was considering something. Like he was making a decision. Then he turned. He stepped past Elena like she was furniture and reached for Matty instead, gripping his hand with both of his, warm and enthusiastic. Good to have you here, he said. His smile was enormous. Really glad you made it in. Matty blinked. Somewhere to Elena's left, a man laughed. Short, sharp, barely disguised. Like someone who'd seen this trick before, and still found it funny. Elena's hand stayed where it was for 2 full seconds. 2 seconds is a long time when everyone in the room is watching. Some were trying not to smile. Some were staring at the table. Emily Vander was looking directly at Elena with an expression that gave nothing away except the fact that she was paying very close attention. Elena lowered her hand. She didn't look at Brad's face. She didn't need to. She turned smoothly and took in the rest of the room. The windows, the skyline, the table laid out with water glasses and leather portfolios, and the quiet arrogance of men who had never once considered that someone might walk in here and take it all apart. Not today, though. Not yet. Brad was already moving, gesturing toward a seat on the far side of the table. Nowhere near the head, nowhere near the position his own team had assigned her in their pre-meeting correspondence. "We've set you up over there," he said, already turning away. Already done with her. Elena looked at Matty. He looked back at her. She gave him the smallest nod. Not yet. She walked to the seat they'd chosen for her, pulled out the chair, and sat down. She set her portfolio on the table. She folded her hands on top of it. And she waited. Elena had been invisible before. Not literally. She was hard to miss. 5'8", red dress, the only black woman in a room full of men who'd been making decisions about other people's neighborhoods for 30 years, but invisible in the way that mattered. The way where someone looks right at you and decides, in the space of a single breath, that you don't count. She knew that feeling the way she knew her own heartbeat. So she sat in the chair they'd chosen for her, far from the head of the table, tucked toward the middle like a guest who'd arrived uninvited. And she opened her portfolio. She uncapped her pen. She smiled at no one in particular. And she started taking notes. Brad Harrington's presentation was polished. She'd give him that. The slides were clean, the numbers were rehearsed, and he moved around the front of the room like a man who'd given this speech 100 times and fully expected it to work 100 more. Meridian Rising, a sweeping urban redevelopment project. New mixed-use buildings, retail corridors, modernized infrastructure. He said the word community 11 times. Elena counted. He never once looked at her when he said it. 15 minutes in, she raised her hand. The projected ROI in year 3 assumes a 12% occupancy premium over current Southside market rates. She kept her voice even, professional. "What's that assumption based on?" Brad paused. "Barely." Then he turned. Not to her, but slightly past her. Toward the CFO, 2 seats down. "We've accounted for the market uplift the development itself will generate." He tapped the slide. "Rising tide, you understand." He hadn't answered her question. She wrote that down. 20 minutes later, she spoke again. "The community displacement projections in Section 4. The footnotes reference a consultant report, but I don't see it in the materials we were sent. Can you speak to those numbers directly?" Brad clicked to the next slide. "We'll have full documentation available post-closing," he said smoothly. Then he looked at Matty. "Does that address your concern?" Matty said nothing. He kept his face perfectly still. Elena wrote that down too. 2 seats to her left. A board member named Giovanni, late 50s, pink tie, the restless energy of someone who'd had too much coffee, covered his mouth with one hand. His shoulders moved. He was laughing. Quietly. Privately. The kind of laugh that says, "I see what's happening and I think it's funny." Elena didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Across the table, Emily Vander was watching. Not the presentation. Elena. She had barely glanced at the slides. She held her pen loosely in one hand and kept her eyes on Elena with the calm, focused attention of someone tracking something important. Something she'd been tracking for a long time. The presentation rolled on. Brad spoke about tax incentives, about municipal partnerships, about the transformative potential of reimagining underutilized urban space. His voice had a rhythm to it, confident, self-satisfied, the verbal equivalent of a man who'd never once been told no by anyone who mattered. Elena filled 2 pages of notes. She caught everything. The gaps in the financials, the vague language around resident impact, the way the word relocation kept appearing in places where a more honest man might have written displacement. She caught the moment Brad referenced a city planning contact by first name, casually, like mentioning an old friend, and the way 2 board members exchanged a brief, knowing glance when he did it. She wrote that down too. At the 30-minute mark, she asked a 3rd question, clean, specific, about the debt structure on the back half of the project's financing. Brad answered it to the window. Giovanni laughed again, openly this time, a short bark that he turned into a cough. The man beside him smirked into his water glass. The CFO studied something fascinating on his tablet screen. Maddie's jaw tightened. Elena could see it from the corner of her eye. She touched his arm once, lightly, under the table. Easy. Brad wrapped up with a grand, sweeping statement about legacy and vision and the future of Chicago's great neighborhoods. He gestured toward Elena's portfolio with the easy confidence of a man who considered the money already deposited. We look forward to formalizing this partnership. He smiled at the room. Polite applause followed. Board members tapping the table, nodding at each other. Elena closed her portfolio. She looked at Maddie. He looked back at her. His expression asked a question. Her expression answered it. Now. Elena reached into her portfolio. Not fast, not dramatic. The same way you'd reach for a pen or check the time. Calm, unhurried, completely in control. She pulled out a single sheet of paper. Crisp, white, already signed at the bottom in her clean, decisive handwriting. She slid it across the table to Brad's CFO. The room didn't react at first. People were still settling from the applause, still riding the comfortable feeling that everything was going according to plan. The CFO looked down at the paper. His smile faded. He read the first 2 lines. Then he read them again. The room got very quiet. Effective immediately, Elena said. Maddox Capital Group is withdrawing its investment commitment to Meridian Rising. Nobody moved. The figure was $750 million. She let that sit for exactly 1 second. That figure is now 0. Brad stared at her. The color in his face shifted. Not all at once, but in stages, like a tide going out. I'm sorry. His voice was careful, controlled. I don't think I heard you correctly. You did, Elena said. That's... He stopped, started again. You can't simply... The letter cites irreconcilable concerns regarding leadership culture and fiduciary alignment, Elena continued, as though he hadn't spoken. My legal team filed the formal withdrawal with your general counsel 11 minutes ago. She glanced at her watch. 12, now. That's when the room came apart. 2 board members started talking over each other. Giovanni pushed back from the table like he needed physical distance from what was happening. The CFO was already on his phone, pressing it to his ear with both hands, his face the color of old paper. Someone said what under their breath? Someone else said it louder. Brad planted both hands flat on the table. This is a stunt, he said. His voice had changed. The smooth, rehearsed confidence was gone. What replaced it was something harder and uglier. You flew out here, sat in that chair, and this is, what? A negotiating tactic? No, Elena said simply. It's a decision. You don't just walk away from $750 million over. He stopped himself. But everyone in the room heard what the end of that sentence was going to be. Over what? Over a handshake? Over the way he'd talked past her for 40 minutes like she wasn't worth addressing directly? Over the seat they'd put her in? Over irreconcilable concerns, Elena said, finishing it for him, her voice smooth as glass. As stated in the letter, Brad's composure cracked down the middle. "This is completely unprofessional," he snapped. "You have obligations. There are agreements in place." "Preliminary agreements," Matty said quietly from beside Elena, speaking for the first time, none of which reached the stage of binding commitment. "Our legal team will be happy to walk yours through the specifics." Brad looked at Matty like he'd forgotten he was there. Then he looked back at Elena. Something moved through his expression. A flash of something mean, something cornered. His voice dropped low. "You're making a serious mistake." Elena stood. She did it slowly, the way she did everything in this room, without rushing, without flinching, without giving him the satisfaction of seeing even a flicker of doubt. She buttoned her blazer, smoothed the front of her red dress with one hand, picked up her portfolio. She turned to Emily Vander, who had not moved, had not spoken, had simply sat at that table and watched everything unfold with those sharp, steady eyes. "Mrs. Vander," Elena said, "always a pleasure." Emily Vander nodded once. Something in her expression shifted. Barely visible, but it was there. Respect, maybe. Or recognition. Elena turned toward the door. "Hey." Brad's voice came from behind her. Loud now. Not bothering anymore with the polished edges. "Hey, I'm talking to you. You walk out that door, and this is done. You understand me? You'll never—" Elena did not look back. She walked through the boardroom door, down the hall, and into the elevator. The doors closed behind her, and Matty with a soft, final sound. Matty let out a long, slow breath, like he'd been holding it for an hour. That was— "Check your phone," Elena said quietly. The elevator began to descend. Elena stood perfectly still, eyes forward, the city falling away outside the glass. Her hands were steady. Her face was calm. But inside her chest, her heart was hammering. Not from fear, from what came next. Matty checked his phone. 3 missed calls. No voicemail. The number was unlisted, but his contacts database pulled a result in under 10 seconds, the kind of database that cost serious money and returned serious information. He turned the screen toward Elena without a word. She read the name. Lenora Harrington. Elena stopped walking. They were in the lobby now. Marble floors, high ceilings, the quiet hum of a building full of people who had no idea what had just happened 42 floors above their heads. A security guard stood near the front desk. 2 men in suits crossed toward the elevators, deep in conversation. Nobody looked at them. Elena took the phone from Matty and stepped toward a private alcove near the building's east wall. A narrow sitting area with 2 chairs and a small table. The kind of space designed for exactly this kind of conversation. Matty followed, positioning himself so his back was to the room. She called the number back. Lenora Harrington picked up on the first ring. "Ms. Maddox." Her voice was 72 years old and carried every one of them, low, unhurried, and completely without pretense. "Thank you for calling back." "Mrs. Harrington." Elena kept her voice neutral. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "No," Lenora said. "I don't imagine you were." A brief pause. "I watched the meeting. Braden had a camera feed installed in the boardroom 3 years ago. He doesn't know that I have access to it?" Another pause, shorter. "I've been watching for some time." Elena said nothing. She let the silence work for her. "What I'm about to tell you," Lenora continued, "is not something I'm sharing out of disloyalty to my son. I want you to understand that." Her voice didn't waver, but something in it tightened. The sound of a woman who had been sitting on something heavy for a very long time. "I'm sharing it because 12,000 people deserve better than what's coming for them." Elena's grip tightened on the phone. Meridian Rising isn't what Braden presented in that room today. Lenora's voice was even, precise, like someone reading from notes they'd prepared carefully. The redevelopment project targets 4 historically black neighborhoods on Chicago's South Side. The plan is full demolition. 12,000 residents displaced. Families, churches, businesses that have been there for generations. She paused. In exchange, Braden has been privately negotiating tax incentive packages with members of the City Planning Commission. Arrangements that are not in any document you were given. The lobby felt very far away. Your $750 million, Lenora continued, was the last piece. The number that made the project financially bulletproof. Too big to stop once the capital was secured and the commission votes were locked in. She let that land. Your withdrawal has damaged the structure, but it hasn't destroyed it. Braden will move quickly. Elena looked at Maddie. His expression told her he was reading everything on her face and cataloging it. He's already started, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Lenora's voice didn't soften. There is a story being prepared for circulation. That Maddox Capital's seed funding, 20 years ago, when you were starting out, was obtained through improper means. It isn't true. But truth isn't the point. The point is to trigger concern among your limited partners and bury you in enough noise that you can't move effectively while Braden finds replacement funding. She paused. He has approximately 30 days before the project's financing window closes without a major capital partner. That is your timeline. Elena closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, then opened them. Why are you telling me this? She asked. Lenora was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice had changed, just slightly. The precision was still there, but underneath it was something that sounded like exhaustion. Like a woman who had watched something go wrong for years and had finally decided she was done watching. Because I raised him, she said, and I know exactly what he is. She stopped. And because you walked out of that boardroom with your head up. Most people don't. The line went quiet. Elena lowered the phone. She stood in the marble alcove and let the full weight of it settle over her. Not just what had happened upstairs, not just the snub or the laughter or the seat they'd put her in, but the 12,000 people who didn't know yet, who were going about their Tuesday morning without any idea that their streets were on a demolition list. She handed the phone back to Maddie. "Get Olivia on the phone," she said. Her voice was steady, decided. "And find out who Reverend Odenwald is." She pushed through the revolving door into the cold Chicago afternoon without looking back. The hotel suite smelled like coffee and urgency. By 6 o'clock that evening, Elena had changed out of the red dress and into something she could actually work in. Dark slacks, a simple black sweater, her hair pulled back. The mahogany desk in the corner of the suite was buried under printed documents, open laptops, and the remnants of a room service order neither she nor Maddie had properly eaten. Olivia Sarson joined by video call at 6:15. She appeared on the laptop screen the way she always did. No preamble, reading glasses already on, a notepad open beside her keyboard. Olivia was 61 years old and had spent 2 decades at the IRS before Elena hired her away with a salary the federal government couldn't match and work that actually kept her interested. She had the specific, unhurried focus of someone who had spent her entire career finding things that other people had tried very hard to hide. "Talk to me," Olivia said. Elena talked. All of it. The boardroom, the handshake, the withdrawal, Lenora's call, the 12,000 residents, the commission deals, the fraud rumor being prepared. She didn't editorialize. She laid it out clean and let Olivia absorb it. Olivia didn't interrupt. When Elena finished, she was quiet for a moment, clicking her pen slowly against her notepad. "Shell companies," she said finally. "That's where it'll be. If he's routing payments to city officials, he's not doing it from the main HMG accounts. Too visible. He'll have layered it. She was already typing. Give me 2 hours. It took her 90 minutes. Got something? Olivia said, her voice sharpening the way it did when a thread pulled clean. 3 vendor contracts inside Meridian Rising's project documentation. Community outreach firms, listed as providing resident engagement services. She turned her screen to show Elena the incorporation records. First one was registered in Delaware 8 months ago. Second one, 9 months. Third one, 7. No websites. No employees on record. No physical office addresses that check out. She looked over her glasses. They're cashing checks for work that was never done. Maddie leaned toward the screen. How much? Combined? Just under $2 million across 14 months. Olivia pulled up another document. But that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is where the money goes after it leaves those accounts. She paused for effect, a habit Elena had learned to respect. I need another day to fully trace it. But the preliminary pattern points toward 3 individuals who all appear in Chicago City Planning Commission meeting records. Elena sat back in her chair. It was one thing to hear it from Lenora. It was another thing entirely to watch Olivia Sarson pull it out of the financial records with her own hands. Maddie was already on his laptop, cross-referencing. I've got commission meeting logs going back 2 years, he said. 3 commissioners attended private dinners with HMG executives, logged in HMG's own expense reports under client entertainment. He looked up. They didn't even bother to hide it well. They didn't think they had to, Elena said. She picked up her phone and dialed Reverend Desmond Odenwald. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice warm and careful in the way of a man accustomed to receiving calls that carried weight. Elena introduced herself. She told him she needed a meeting. Tomorrow morning. His church. In person. She told him it was about Meridian Rising and the South Side neighborhoods. There was a pause on his end. Not surprise, exactly. Something more like recognition. I've been waiting for someone to call about that, he said quietly. Come at 9. Elena set the phone down. Olivia worked through the evening, pulling threads and flagging anomalies. Maddie built a timeline. Every commission meeting, every HMG dinner, every shell company payment, laid out in chronological order on a shared document that grew longer with every hour. The room service dishes went cold. Elena refilled her coffee twice and didn't taste either cup. Around 10 o'clock, Maddie closed his laptop and stretched. You should sleep. Elena looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. All those lit windows, all those lives stacked on top of each other, spreading south toward neighborhoods that didn't know what was being planned for them. Lenora said 30 days, Elena said. I know. That's not very long. Maddie was quiet for a moment. Then, you know, this just became something much bigger than Brad Harrington. Elena wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. The city glittered outside, cold and indifferent and enormous. It always was, she said. He just helped me see it. The church was old in the best way. Solid brick, worn wooden floors, windows that let in the kind of morning light that made everything look a little more serious and a little more sacred at the same time. Elena and Maddie arrived at 9 on the dot. Reverend Desmond Odenwald was already waiting, a tall man in his mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with the kind of steady presence that made a room feel anchored. He wore a simple dark sweater and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He shook Elena's hand first, firmly, without hesitation. She noticed that. He led them to his office at the back of the church, a small room lined with bookshelves and stacked with folders, the organized chaos of someone managing more than one crisis at a time. A folding table had been set up in the center with extra chairs. A pot of coffee sat on the corner shelf. Sit, he said simply. Talk. Elena sat. She opened her portfolio and spread HMG's internal development maps across the table. The demolition zones marked in red, the rezoning boundaries in blue, the proposed new construction overlaid in clean architectural gray. She didn't say anything at first. She let him look. Reverend Odenwald leaned forward. He studied the maps for a long moment, his reading glasses now pulled down onto his nose. His expression didn't collapse into shock the way some people's might. Instead, it hardened, slowly, steadily, the way iron cools into something permanent. "That's Millard Street," he said quietly, pointing. "That whole block. The Hendersons have been there since 1974. His finger moved. "That's the Cornerstone Community Center. We run after-school programs there for 60 kids. He looked up at Elena over his glasses. "And that," his voice tightened, "that is my grandfather's church, built in 1923. My family has kept that building standing for 100 years. The room was very still. They were going to demolish it," Elena said, "without telling you, without telling anyone." Odenwald sat back in his chair. He took his glasses off and held them in both hands. "No," he said slowly. "They told us something, just not the truth." He stood and moved to the filing cabinet behind his desk, pulling out a thick folder. He set it on top of Elena's maps. 6 months ago, city contractors started showing up in the neighborhood. Clipboards, polo shirts, very friendly. Said they were conducting urban renewal surveys. Wanted to know how long families had lived there, whether they owned or rented, what improvements they'd like to see in the community. Matty picked up one of the survey forms. It was thorough, detailed, and completely stripped of any language that might suggest what the information would actually be used for. They were building a displacement database, Matty said. "That's exactly what they were doing," Odenwald said. He sat back down. "I kept copies of everything, every survey form they distributed, every sign they posted, every flyer." He tapped the folder. "I didn't know what I was keeping it for. I just knew something wasn't right." Elena photographed every page. They talked for another hour. Odenwald walked her through the community, the families, the history, the businesses. A woman named Rachel, whose family had lived on the same block for 47 years. A barber shop that had been operating since 1989. 3 generations of the same neighborhood, layered on top of each other like the rings of something living. Elena listened carefully and wrote names down. These weren't statistics. They were people. She needed to remember that. And she needed the reader to remember it too, when the time came. Before she left, she proposed the town hall. Odenwald agreed immediately. "But not until you're ready," he said. "These people have been let down before. Don't call them together until you have something solid enough to stand on." "I will," Elena said. Outside, walking back to the car, Matty's phone buzzed. He read the notification. Stopped walking. "What?" Elena asked. He turned the screen toward her. A Google alert. A financial blog post with a headline in bold, "Questions emerge about Maddox Capital Group's founding capital." Elena read the first paragraph. Her name, her firm. A carefully vague suggestion of impropriety 20 years ago. Sourced to an unnamed industry contact. She handed the phone back. "Brad moved fast," Matty said. The cold air moved through the street between them. Somewhere down the block, a kid was shooting a basketball alone in a driveway, the ball hitting the backboard with a steady, rhythmic crack. Elena looked at the neighborhood around her, at the brick houses and the bare winter trees and the lives being quietly lived on streets that were already marked for destruction on a map she'd seen that morning. "Faster than I expected," she said. She got in the car. Good. By the next morning, it had spread. The blog post had been picked up by 2 financial news aggregators overnight, and by 8 a.m., Elena's phone was logging calls she hadn't asked for and didn't want. 4 of them were from limited partners, the investors whose money lived inside Maddox Capital's funds, the people whose continued confidence was the foundation everything else was built on. She let the calls go to voicemail. She read the transcripts instead. The post itself was careful. That was the thing about a smear done well. It never said anything directly. It used words like questions and concerns and sources familiar with the matter. It referenced Maddox Capital's early years, the speed of Elena's initial growth, the capital that had seeded her first fund when she was 22 years old, and nobody in this industry had wanted to give a young black woman from Detroit the time of day. It implied, without stating, that money like that didn't appear from nowhere. It was a lie dressed in the language of journalism. And it was working. Matty set his laptop in front of her at the breakfast table. Brad's public statement had gone up at 7:45 a.m., posted on HMG's official communications page, polished and measured, not mentioning Elena by name once. It spoke about the importance of verified partnerships in community development, about due diligence and fiduciary responsibility, about how HMG remained committed to working with partners whose records reflect the highest standards of integrity. Every single word pointed directly at her. "He's good," Matty said quietly. "I'll give him that." "He's practiced," Elena said. "There's a difference." 2 more LP calls came in before 9. Elena read both transcripts. The language was careful. "Just wanted to check in, seen some chatter. Nothing we're worried about. Just due diligence on our end." But the subtext was clear. Seeds had been planted. People were watching. Elena set down her coffee. "Book a room," she said. "Somewhere neutral. A hotel conference space, not our suite. I want cameras there by noon, and I want our full financial documentation ready to present. 30 years of audited records. IRS filings, reference letters." She paused. "Call Senator Albright's office, and Treasury contact Donna Wells. I want written statements from both by 11. Matty was already on the phone. The press conference happened at 1 p.m. Elena stood at the front of a clean, well-lit hotel conference room with 30 years of Maddox Capital's financial history laid out behind her on a display board. No notes, no teleprompter. She spoke clearly and without visible anger, which was its own kind of weapon. She presented the audited records first, then the IRS documentation, then the letters, Senator Albright's, Donna Wells's, and 2 others from financial industry figures whose names carried serious weight. She answered every question from the 6 journalists in the room. When one of them pushed on the specific blog post, Elena looked at him steadily. "Maddox Capital's founding capital came from my grandmother's insurance payout, a small business loan from a Detroit community bank, and 4 years of my own savings." She paused. "I have documentation for all of it. It's in the packet in front of you." Another pause. "What I don't have documentation for is who paid to have that story written. But I imagine someone will find out." 2 of the journalists were already typing. She did not mention Meridian Rising. Not one word. She was saving that, and saving it carefully, for the right moment, with the right preparation behind it. That afternoon, while Matty fielded LP follow-up calls, Olivia phoned in with an update. The shell company traces were tightening. She had now confirmed that the payment routing connected to all 3 city planning commissioners led back to a secondary Delaware entity, a company incorporated 6 months before the first Meridian Rising community survey hit the South Side. And there was something else. The secondary entity, Olivia said, her voice carrying that particular edge it got when she'd found something important, shows up in a 2021 federal database. Preliminary review flag for sanctions violations. It was never actioned. The review was dropped. But the flag is there. Elena was quiet for a moment. "Keep pulling." "Always do," Olivia said. That evening, Elena was at her desk when Matty walked in holding his tablet with the expression he wore when the news was bad. "Brad's lawyers filed," he said. "Temporary asset freeze injunction. They're claiming the fraud allegation warrants a preliminary financial investigation." Elena took the tablet, read the filing. It was thin, meritless, tactical, designed purely to make noise and drain resources. The legal equivalent of throwing sand in someone's eyes. She set the tablet down. "He wants me buried in paperwork," she said. Matty waited. "Make sure our litigation team buries him instead." The message came in at 11:14 p.m. Olivia was still at her desk. She kept hours that would have broken most people half her age, when the secure contact form on her private investigator portal received a submission. No name. No phone number. The message was 4 sentences long. "I work in HMG's legal department. I have something you need to hear. It's a recorded phone call. I've been carrying this long enough." Olivia forwarded it to Elena within 60 seconds. Elena was awake. She read it standing at the window of her hotel suite, the Chicago skyline doing what it always did. Glittering, indifferent, enormous. She typed back 2 words to Olivia. "Verify first." It took Olivia 18 hours. She ran the contact through every channel available to her, cross-referencing the submission's metadata, confirming the source's employment through public HMG records, and establishing through a trusted intermediary that the person was exactly who they implied. A paralegal inside HMG's legal team. 4 years with the company. Clean record. No prior contact with journalists or investigators. Someone who had simply decided they were done. The exchange happened through Olivia's intermediary. Careful, documented, and structured to protect the source under Illinois whistleblower statutes. What arrived on the other end was an audio file, 11 minutes and 43 seconds long. Legally recorded by the source during a conference call they had been included on as a note-taker. Elena, Matty, Olivia, joining by video, and Kimberly Dempsey, who had been in quiet contact with Elena since the boardroom clip went viral 3 days ago, all listened to it together in Elena's hotel suite. Nobody spoke for the first 3 minutes. Brad's voice was immediately recognizable. Relaxed, almost bored, the way he sounded when he was among people he considered his equals. His CFO was on the call. So was a man who was addressed only as Commissioner. His voice older, measured, careful with his words in the specific way of someone who has learned to be careful with his words. They discussed Meridian Rising's timeline. They discussed the commission vote schedule. They discussed what Brad called the community management piece, his term for handling the inevitable pushback from Southside residents once demolition notices went out. "What's the realistic window on appeals?" Brad asked. 60 days, standard, the commissioner said. "But if we run the notices concurrent with the holiday calendar, realistically nobody has legal counsel organized before the window closes." "Beautiful," Brad said. "Just that. One word." Then the CFO asked about the residents who had already been contacted through the survey process. What happened if they organized before the notices went out? Brad laughed. It was a full, easy laugh. Genuinely amused. "They'll get vouchers," he said. "Relocation assistance. Standard package." A pause. "What do they expect? A gold watch?" The CFO laughed. The commissioner made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but wasn't a protest either. The call continued for another 8 minutes, covering financing structure and commission vote timing. Then it ended. The hotel suite was very quiet. Kimberly had her laptop open, but she wasn't typing. She was staring at the speaker Elena had placed in the center of the coffee table, as though the voice might still be in it somewhere. Matty sat forward with his elbows on his knees, jaw tight, looking at the floor. Olivia, on the video screen, was already writing notes. "I want to publish this today," Kimberly said. Her voice was controlled, but there was something burning underneath it. Tomorrow at the latest. People need to— Not yet, Elena said. Kimberly looked at her. If we release this before we have the commissioners on record, Brad's lawyers challenge the chain of custody, burn the evidence trail, and the officials walk clean. Elena kept her voice even. We need the Attorney General's office to receive this through proper channels first. We need at least 2 commissioners facing enough pressure that cooperation looks better than obstruction. She looked at Olivia on the screen. How long do you need? 72 hours, Olivia said. I have a contact at the AG's office. If I can get this to her with the full Shell Company documentation as supporting evidence, she can open a preliminary inquiry. Kimberly closed her laptop slowly. She looked at Elena for a long moment. 72 hours, she said. Not 1 minute more. Elena nodded. The room exhaled. For the first time since the boardroom, something close to relief moved through Elena's chest. Not victory. She was too careful for that. But the walls were closing in on Braden Harrington III, and for the first time, she could hear it. She looked at Maddie. He looked back at her and said nothing. He didn't need to. For 48 hours, everything moved in the right direction. Elena's litigation team filed a countermotion against Brad's asset freeze injunction on Thursday morning. By afternoon, the presiding judge had reviewed it and denied Brad's motion. The filing was too thin, the legal basis too weak, the whole thing too obviously tactical to survive scrutiny. Brad's lawyers had thrown sand and the wind had blown it back. Olivia's AG contact responded within 24 hours of receiving the preliminary evidence package. Her message was brief, but it was enough. This warrants a closer look. Send everything you have. 3 words that meant the machinery of something larger was beginning to turn. Kimberly had 3 corroborating sources inside the Planning Commission. Not commissioners themselves. Staffers, assistants, people who sat in rooms and took notes and had been sitting on what they knew because nobody had come asking the right questions until now. They were careful sources, skittish sources, but they were real. Their accounts lined up with the Shell Company documentation and the recorded call in ways that couldn't be coincidence. Reverend Odenwald called Elena on Thursday evening. The community organizing was quiet but steady. He had spoken privately with 12 family heads on the targeted blocks, longtime residents who had the trust of their neighbors. Nobody was panicking. Nobody was tipping their hand. They were simply ready to move when Elena said it was time. Lenora Harrington sent a text on Friday morning. 2 sentences. I'll testify if it comes to that, whatever it takes. Emily Vander emailed. Formal, brief, professional. I am paying close attention. 5 words that carried the weight of a woman who had been waiting a very long time to pay attention to exactly this. Everything was converging. The 72-hour window was down to its final 90 minutes. Olivia was preparing the full evidence package for the AG's office, the Shell Company records, the commissioner payment traces, the sanctions flag on the secondary entity, the whistleblower recording with full chain of custody documentation. It was airtight. It was thorough. It was the kind of submission that serious people took seriously. Elena was at her desk when Maddie brought her coffee and said quietly, 90 minutes. She nodded. I know. She didn't say what she felt, which was something dangerously close to hope. And that was the moment it started to unravel. It didn't happen dramatically. It never did. The worst things rarely announced themselves. They slipped in through the side door, quiet and ordinary, wearing the face of something small. A junior member of Olivia's research team, 26 years old, 2 years out of college, genuinely good at his job, and genuinely frightened by the asset freeze injunction and the escalating pressure of the past week, made a phone call Thursday night to a friend, not a journalist, not anyone connected to HMG, Just a friend he trusted, someone he'd gone to college with, someone he needed to talk to because he was scared, and the weight of what they were sitting on had become too much to carry quietly. That friend told someone else, just in passing, just a fragment, something big involving HMG and the AG's office. That fragment found its way, through 2 more conversations, to someone who knew someone inside Brad's legal team. By Friday morning, Brad's lawyers knew the AG submission was coming. They moved within hours. 2 of them contacted the whistleblower directly. Not threatening exactly, but precise. They raised questions about the recording's chain of custody. They referenced the source's employment agreement and its confidentiality clauses. They made clear, in the careful language of people who knew exactly what they were doing, that cooperation with outside investigators would be scrutinized closely. The whistleblower went silent, and Olivia's AG contact went cold. Her message arrived at 6:47 p.m., brief, apologetic, and final. The chain of custody questions had created enough procedural uncertainty that she couldn't move forward without more time to establish clean documentation. She needed 2 weeks, minimum. Maybe more. The 72-hour window collapsed. Then, at 8 p.m., Brad held an unscheduled press conference. He stood in front of HMG's logo, looking like a man who had just won something. He announced that a sovereign wealth intermediary had committed $800 million to Meridian Rising, $50 million more than Elena's original figure. He didn't name the intermediary. He said the project timeline was unchanged. Then he looked directly into the camera. "Some distractions," he said, with a small, satisfied smile, "are just distractions." Maddie turned off the television. Elena sat at the window. The city below was dark and glittering and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened. Maddie found her there 20 minutes later. "We can still—" "I know," she said quietly. "Give me tonight." The press conference clip played on a loop. Elena had turned the television off, but Maddie had it on his laptop, the volume low, and she could still hear Brad's voice drifting across the hotel suite every time the segment cycled back to the beginning. Some distractions are just distractions. The small smile, the direct look into the camera, a man performing confidence so thoroughly he had started to believe it himself. She made herself watch it 3 times, not out of masochism. Out of discipline. You didn't beat something by looking away from it. The sovereign wealth intermediary was the problem. $800 million from a source Brad hadn't named publicly, which meant either the source didn't want to be named, or Brad was protecting them for reasons that had nothing to do with privacy and everything to do with what scrutiny might reveal. Olivia had started tracing it within an hour of the announcement. By midnight, she had a preliminary profile. "It's a rooting entity," she told Elena on the phone, her voice carrying that flat, focused quality it got when she didn't like what she was looking at. "Not a direct fund. It acts as an intermediary between the actual capital source and the investment destination. These structures exist for legitimate reasons, sometimes." A pause. "And for illegitimate ones more often than people admit." "What else?" Elena asked. "It has a prior appearance in federal records. Not the same sanctions flag as the shell companies. A different database. Pre-enforcement watch list from 2019. A preliminary review that was closed without action." Olivia paused again. 2 closed reviews in connected entities. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern. Is it actionable? Not yet. But it's significant. And if someone with federal jurisdiction decided to look closely, "Keep pulling," Elena said. She set the phone down. Maddie was at the other desk, working through LP communications, reassuring, documenting, holding the line against the quiet erosion that Brad's press conference had been designed to cause. 2 more limited partners had called that evening. The asset freeze injunction had been dismissed, But the noise around it hadn't fully settled. Brad had been methodical about that. Every move calibrated not to destroy Elena directly, but to make her look unstable, embattled, surrounded by questions. "How are the LPs?" Elena asked. "Holding," Maddie said. "For now." The press conference documentation helped. "But if this goes another 2 weeks without resolution—" He stopped. "I know," Elena said. She stood and walked to the window. 14 floors down, Chicago moved through its Friday night. Cars, lights, people going places, the great, indifferent machinery of a city that didn't know or care about what was happening in this room. Somewhere south of where she stood, 12,000 people were going about their evening in neighborhoods that were still on a demolition list. Reverend Odenwald had called that afternoon. He was steady, still organizing, still holding his community together without triggering alarm. But she could hear the strain underneath his steadiness. People were starting to ask questions. The surveys, the city contractors, the vague official language. It was adding up for some of the sharper-eyed residents. They could feel something coming. They just didn't know its shape yet. Elena pressed 2 fingers against the cold glass of the window. Lenora's voice came back to her from the lobby phone call. 30 days. That had been 9 days ago. 21 days left before the financing window closed, and Meridian Rising became, in the cold language of done deals, irreversible. Brad had his replacement capital. The AG's office had gone cold. The whistleblower was silent. The evidence was real and solid, and completely inaccessible through the channels they'd been building toward. Elena ran through it once more in her head. Slowly, methodically, the way she'd learned to audit a financial model when something didn't balance. You didn't panic when the numbers were wrong. You went back to the beginning and looked for what you'd missed. She'd been building outward. Investigators, journalists, attorneys general. All of it real. All of it valid. All of it contingent on chains of evidence that Brad had now twice managed to disrupt from the outside. She hadn't gone inward. She hadn't gone back to the source. She turned from the window. Maddie looked up. "I need to make a call," she said. He checked the time. "It's almost 2 in the morning." "I know." Elena picked up her phone. She pulled up Lenora Harrington's number. Her thumb hovered over it for 1 second. Not hesitation, just the breath you take before something changes. She pressed call. It rang twice. Lenora picked up. Lenora answered on the second ring. "I wondered when you'd call," she said. Her voice was unhurried, clear, and carried none of the fog of someone pulled from sleep. She had been awake. Elena suspected she had been awake for several nights running. The same way you stay awake when something you set in motion a long time ago is finally approaching the moment it either lands or doesn't. "I watched his press conference," Lenora said, before Elena could speak. The smile at the end. He practiced that. A brief pause. His father used to do the same thing. Elena sat down on the edge of the bed. "Mrs. Harrington, I need to know if there's something I'm missing. Something inside that company that I haven't been able to reach from the outside." Silence. Not the silence of someone deciding whether to speak. The silence of someone deciding where to begin. "My husband built HMG from 12 employees and 1 contract in 1987, Lenora said finally. He was meticulous about documentation. He believed that a company without a proper memory was a company that could be rewritten by whoever held the pen. She paused. He had a governance clause written into the original company charter, a recording requirement for all board meetings. Every session, captured and archived. The recordings are stored on a private server managed by my personal legal counsel. Another pause. Braden never fully read the charter. He inherited the company and assumed he understood it. He was wrong about that. Elena was very still. "How far back do the recordings go?" she asked. 4 years, Lenora said. From the point I asked my attorney to activate the clause. I had been watching Braden's decisions for some time before that, and I decided I wanted a record. Her voice was precise and without apology. There are recordings of 31 board meetings. In a number of them, Braden discusses the Meridian Rising displacement strategy in explicit terms, the tax credit engineering, the commission relationships. A pause. And the residents. Elena closed her eyes. There are 3 sessions, Lenora continued, in which board members laughed when the community resistance question came up. One member described the Southside residents as, she stopped briefly, composed herself. He described them as people whose objections would evaporate once the vouchers cleared. Her voice had thinned to something brittle and controlled. Braden said nothing to correct him. He was the one who laughed first. The hotel room was absolutely silent. Elena opened her eyes and looked at the ceiling. 31 board meetings. 4 years of decisions, conversations, and laughter. All of it recorded. All of it archived. All of it legally obtained under a corporate governance clause that Braden Harrington had never bothered to read because he had never imagined it might matter. Mrs. Harrington, Elena said carefully, why haven't you used these before now? Lenora was quiet for a moment. Because using them required someone worth using them with, she said. Someone who understood what they were looking at and what to do with it. Someone who would make sure it landed correctly, on the right desks, through the right channels, in a way that couldn't be dismissed or buried. She paused. I've been watching Braden operate for 4 years. Investors come in, investors pull back. Reporters start digging, get redirected. People inside the company see things and decide the risk of speaking isn't worth it. Another pause, quieter. Nobody stayed. Elena said nothing. You withdrew $750 million, Lenora said, and walked out of that boardroom without raising your voice. And then instead of going home, you spent 9 days building a case for 12,000 people you'd never met. Her voice shifted. Something underneath the precision softened, just slightly. You stayed. The words sat in the room between them. Elena pressed her free hand flat against her knee and breathed. If I arrange for your attorney to deliver the recordings directly to the Attorney General's office, she said, with the full governance documentation establishing their legality, would you authorize that? I already called my attorney before I went to bed tonight, Lenora said simply. I was waiting for you to ask. Elena stood up slowly. The city was still outside the window. Gray now, the deep flat gray of a Chicago night moving toward morning, the skyline's lights beginning to soften at the edges as 4 a.m. approached. One more thing, Lenora said. There's a board member in those recordings, a man named Giovanni. The name landed with recognition. The pink tie, the short bark of a laugh. Pay attention to what he says in the session from March of last year. About the commission contacts. A pause. It's specific. I will, Elena said. Good. Lenora's voice was tired now, finally. The kind of tired that comes after a very long wait. Get some sleep, Ms. Maddox. You have work to do tomorrow. Elena lowered the phone. Outside, the first thin light of morning was beginning at the edge of the sky. She opened her laptop. She didn't sleep at all. By 7 a.m., Elena had 4 pages of notes and a plan that was either going to work completely or not at all. There was no middle ground anymore. Brad had his replacement capital. The AG's office had gone cold once already. The whistleblower was silent. The 30-day window Lenora had warned her about now had 12 days left on it. Every move from this point forward had to land. Not most of them. All of them. She called Matty at 7:15. He picked up on the first ring, which told her he hadn't slept either. Get Olivia and Kimberly on a secure call, she said. And Lenora's attorney. 9 a.m., our suite. Done, he said. By 9, the suite looked like a war room. Matty at the main desk, Olivia on the large screen via video call, Kimberly seated across the coffee table with her laptop open, and Lenora's attorney, a compact, silver-haired woman named Judith Crane, joining by secure video from her downtown office. Elena stood at the head of the room. No chair. She always thought better on her feet. She laid out the 4 fronts without preamble. Front 1 is legal, she said. Judith, Lenora has authorized you to deliver the full board recording archive to the Illinois Attorney General's office this morning. I need that submission to include the complete corporate governance documentation establishing the recording's legality under the original HMG charter. Chain of custody, authentication, everything. She looked at the screen. The AG's office went cold because the chain got questioned. This time there's no chain to question. These recordings come directly from the company's own governance structure, delivered by the company's own stakeholder attorney. They can't touch it. Judith nodded once. I can be at the AG's office by 11. Front 2 is media, Elena said, turning to Kimberly. You get everything. The development maps, the shell company records, the offshore intermediary flag, board recording transcripts from 3 key sessions. I'll identify which ones after I've reviewed the Garrett material Lenora flagged. She paused. The piece runs at the end of the 96-hour window. Not before. Judith needs the AG submission to land and be processed before this goes public. Kimberly was already typing. 96 hours, she said. I can work with that. Front 3 is the community, Elena continued. Reverend Odenwald has been organizing for 9 days. The town hall happens in 96 hours, same night the piece publishes. The residents hear it from me directly, in person, before they read it anywhere else. She said this carefully, because it mattered. These are people who have been lied to by officials with clipboards and friendly smiles. They deserve to hear the truth from someone standing in front of them, not from a news article. Matty wrote something down. I'll coordinate with the Reverend on logistics. Front 4 is the board, Elena said. She looked at Judith's screen. Lenora's attorney will brief Emily Vander today. Not the full recording archive. That goes to the AG first. But enough. Emily needs to know what's in those sessions, and she needs time to quietly canvass the board before the article publishes. Elena paused. When Kimberly's piece drops, Emily calls the emergency session. The timing matters. The public and the board need to be moving simultaneously. The room was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of people absorbing a plan and measuring it against reality. Olivia leaned toward her camera. The intermediary trace, she said. I'm 48 hours from having something solid enough to include in the media package. The federal watch list connection is real, and I can document it. You have 48 hours, Elena said. Then it goes to Kimberly. Judith spoke from her screen. Ms. Maddox, I want to be direct about one thing. Her voice was careful and professional. Once I walk into the AG's office this morning, this moves into a phase you can't fully control. Investigations take their own shape. I know, Elena said. That's the point. I don't want to control it. I want to hand it to people whose job it is to take it from here. She paused. I just needed to make sure they had everything they needed to do that job. Judith nodded. Then I'll see you on the other side. The call ended. Olivia signed off to keep working. Kimberly packed up her laptop and headed for the door, already on her phone. Judith's screen went dark. Matty stood up and looked at Elena. The suite was quiet now. Just the 2 of them and 4 pages of notes and 12 days left on a clock only they could fully see. 96 hours, he said. Elena picked up her coffee. It had gone cold while she talked, but she drank it anyway. Let's not waste any of them, she said. The church was full. Not just the pews, the side aisles, the back wall, the folding chairs that Reverend Odenwald's volunteers had set up in every available space. 400 people, maybe more. Elena stood at the side entrance and looked out at them before she walked in, and the weight of it settled over her like something physical. Old women in church coats, men with work-roughened hands folded in their laps, young mothers with children pressed close to their sides, teenagers who had come because their grandparents had asked them to, and were now sitting up straight because something in the room's temperature told them this mattered. These were the people on the maps. These were the red zones. Reverend Odenwald touched her arm lightly. "They're ready," he said. Elena walked in. The room shifted when she entered. Not loudly, but perceptibly, the way a room shifts when the person everyone has been waiting for finally arrives. Odenwald introduced her briefly and without exaggeration. He said she was a woman who had come to Chicago on one kind of business and stayed for a better kind. That was enough. Elena stepped to the front. No podium between her and the room. No notes in her hand. She had decided that before she came. No paper, no barrier, nothing that put distance between her and 400 people who deserved to be looked at directly. She started with the truth. 9 days ago, she said, I walked into a boardroom on the 42nd floor of a building about 4 miles north of where we're standing. I went there to finalize a $750 million investment into a project called Meridian Rising. She paused. I left without making that investment. And what I've learned in the 9 days since is why that matters to every single person in this room. She showed them the maps. Maddie had set up a projection screen behind her, and when the demolition zones appeared, the red overlaid on street names they all recognized, the room changed. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in a wave that moved from the front rows backward. A woman 2 rows in pressed her hand over her mouth. A man near the aisle leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and stared at the screen like he was trying to find an error in it. Elena walked them through everything. The displacement plan, the 12,000 residents, the tax credit engineering, the shell companies and the commissioner payments. She used plain language, no corporate vocabulary, no softening euphemisms. She said demolish when she meant demolish. She said displaced when she meant displaced. She said without telling you when she meant without telling you. She played 12 seconds of the recorded call. Just one exchange. Brad's voice asking about the appeal window, the commissioner's answer, and then Brad's laugh. They'll get vouchers. What do they expect? A gold watch? The silence after those 12 seconds was the loudest thing Elena had ever heard in a room. Then someone in the 4th row said, quietly but clearly, Lord, have mercy. And something broke open. Not chaos. Odenwald's presence kept it from becoming that. But the room filled with sound. Voices, questions, a woman somewhere near the back who was crying without trying to hide it. Elena stood at the front and absorbed it. She didn't rush them. She didn't move to calm it down. They had earned the right to feel this. After a few minutes, Odenwald raised his hand, and the room settled back into something focused and fierce. Elena spoke for another 20 minutes. She told them about Judith Crane delivering the board recordings to the AG's office. She told them about Kimberly's article, publishing tonight. She told them about Emily Vander and the board session being called. She told them about the Maddox Community Preservation Fund, $50 million, South Side development, designed with residents, built by local contractors, preserving what was already there. She told them it wasn't charity. It was investment in people who had always been worth investing in. When she finished, Reverend Odenwald spoke. His voice filled the church the way only his could, deep and certain and carrying the specific authority of a man who had stood in this room through funerals and floods and Sunday mornings when hope was hard to locate. He spoke about the neighborhood as a living thing, about what it meant to fight for it. The standing ovation started before he finished. Elena stood at the front of that church, with 400 people on their feet around her, and she felt something she hadn't let herself feel in 9 days. Not relief exactly, and not victory. Something steadier than both. A woman appeared at her elbow, 71 years old, small, wearing a good coat over a church dress. Her name was Rachel. She had lived on one of the targeted blocks for 47 years. She didn't say anything. She took Elena's hand in both of hers and held it. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. It was Kimberly. Article just went live. Elena looked at Rachel's face, at the room around them. "It's time," she said. Kimberly's article broke at 9:47 p.m. By midnight, it had been picked up by 14 national outlets. By 2 a.m., it was the most read story on 3 major financial news platforms. By the time Chicago's Friday morning commuters were unlocking their phones over coffee, Braden Harrington III was the most searched name in Illinois. The piece was everything Elena had handed Kimberly and more. 6,000 words, meticulously sourced, structured like a controlled demolition, each section removing another support beam until the whole thing came down. The shell companies, the commissioner payments, the displacement timeline, the board recording transcripts, the sovereign wealth intermediary's federal watch list connection, which Olivia had delivered to Kimberly with 4 hours to spare. And at the center of it, reproduced in full, the transcript of the recorded phone call. Brad's voice rendered in black and white. What do they expect? A gold watch, sitting on the page like a confession. Kimberly had also, in the article's final section, included something Elena hadn't provided. She had found Rachel. 3 paragraphs near the end of the piece. Rachel's name, her 47 years on the block, her family history on that street, told in her own words, gathered in a phone interview Kimberly had conducted 2 nights before the town hall. It was the kind of detail that turned a financial scandal into something human. Editors knew it. Readers felt it. By morning, Rachel's name was in the comments of every reshare. Elena read those 3 paragraphs in the back of a car at 6 a.m. and said nothing for a long time. Matty was beside her. He didn't ask what she was thinking. He already knew. The sovereign wealth intermediary withdrew its letter of intent from Meridian Rising at 7:12 a.m., before most of HMG's own employees had arrived at the office. No statement. No explanation. The withdrawal was filed quietly through legal channels, the way you drop something and walk away from it quickly in a public place. Olivia confirmed it by 7:30. The federal watch list exposure had done exactly what exposure was supposed to do. $800 million. Gone before breakfast. Brad arrived at HMG headquarters at 8:45 a.m. to find the building's lobby crowded with camera crews and a security detail that looked at him with the careful neutrality of people following updated instructions. His assistant met him at the elevator and told him, in a voice that betrayed nothing, that the board had convened an emergency session at 8 a.m. It was already in progress. He walked into his own boardroom to find Emily Vander at the head of the table. His chair. She looked at him the way you look at something you have been studying for a very long time, and finally understand completely. She did not stand. She did not greet him. She gestured to the single empty seat remaining, near the middle of the table, to one side, away from the head. Elena, watching the account unfold later through Matty's contact inside the building, would note the specific geography of that detail. Brad's opening statement lasted 4 minutes. He called Kimberly's article a targeted smear. He characterized Elena as a destabilizing outside actor with financial motivations. He described the board recordings as a governance overreach by a minority stakeholder. His voice was controlled, and his language was precise, and he looked around the table for the faces that had always nodded when he needed them to nod. They looked at the table. Judith Crane appeared on the boardroom screen by video connection. She walked the board through the recording's legal standing, the original charter clause, the authentication documentation, the Attorney General's confirmation of receipt, and preliminary inquiry status. She was methodical and unhurried, and when she finished, there were no questions because there was nothing left to ask. The Illinois AG's office had issued formal investigative subpoenas to all 3 planning commissioners by 9 a.m. 2 had already announced resignations before the board session reached its vote. The 3rd had hired a criminal defense attorney. Emily Vander called the vote. It was not close. Brad was removed as CEO effective immediately, pending the outcome of the formal investigation. Security. HMG's own security, men who had greeted Brad by name for 11 years, escorted him from the boardroom as a procedural requirement of the investigation's terms. He walked past the chair near the middle of the table, the one they'd put him in. Emily Vander called Elena directly at 10:17 a.m. "It's done," she said. Elena was standing at the window of her hotel suite. She closed her eyes for 3 full seconds, heard the city below, heard her own heartbeat. "Thank you, Emily," she said. Outside HMG's building, Brad walked through the lobby into a wall of cameras. On the news ticker running beneath his image, the chyron read, "HMG CEO removed amid federal investigation." Above it, on loop, was the clip from his press conference. Some distractions are just distractions. 6 weeks later, the sky over the South Side was the kind of cold, clean blue that only shows up in Chicago in winter. Sharp and bright and honest, the kind of sky that doesn't pretend to be anything other than what it is. Elena arrived early. She always arrived early. Old habit, older discipline. The same one that had gotten her to every meeting, every closing, every moment that mattered before anyone else was ready. She stood at the edge of the vacant lot on Millard Street and looked at it in the quiet before everyone else arrived. Just the lot, and the sky, and the bare winter trees lining the block like patient witnesses. This was the first demolition site. Red zone. On the map, Brad had never meant for anyone outside that boardroom to see. This exact patch of earth, frozen now, dusted with the remnants of last week's snow, had been scheduled to become a staging ground for heavy equipment. It had been given a project code and a clearance date, and a line in a financial model that described it as Phase 1 remediation. Nobody had asked the people who lived on this block what they thought about that. Elena crouched down and pressed her palm flat against the ground. Cold. Solid. Still here. She stood up when she heard the cars arriving. They came in 1s and 2s, Reverend Odenwald first, then Mattie. Then the delegation of community leaders Odenwald had organized over the past 6 weeks. 12 people who represented the targeted blocks, elected informally by their neighbors to stand here and mark this moment. A photographer from Kimberly's outlet set up at the perimeter. A small news crew positioned themselves to one side, respectful of the distance Elena had requested. Emily Vander arrived in a dark coat and low heels, picking her way carefully across the frozen ground with the deliberate dignity of a woman who had not come here to perform anything, only to witness. She had been named interim board chair of a restructured HMG 10 days after Brad's removal, with a mandate that had been written, in part, by Elena's legal team. Meridian Rising had been formally suspended pending the federal investigation. The company's resources were being redirected. It was slow and imperfect, and nowhere near enough by itself, but it was real. Emily caught Elena's eye across the lot and nodded once. Elena nodded back. Rachel arrived last. She came with her daughter, a woman in her late 40s who had the same steady eyes as her mother, and she walked across the frozen lot with a cane and a good coat and the particular bearing of someone who has lived long enough to know the difference between a ceremony and a reckoning. When she reached Elena, she stopped and looked at her for a moment without speaking. "My grandmother planted a garden in the backyard of the house on this block," Rachel said. "Tomatoes every summer. She said the soil here was good." She looked at the ground. I always believed her. Elena had no words for that. She didn't try to find any. She just held Rachel's gaze and let it mean what it meant. Reverend Odenwald gathered everyone in a loose circle. He spoke briefly about the neighborhood, about its history, about what it meant to fight for something and win. His voice carried across the cold air without effort. A few people bowed their heads. A few looked up at the blue sky. Matty stood at the back of the circle with his hands in his coat pockets, and Elena caught the expression on his face, the private, unguarded look of someone who had walked every step of a very long road and was only now allowing themselves to feel where it had ended. A reporter called out from behind the perimeter rope, "Ms. Maddox, do you have anything to say to Braden Harrington?" The circle went quiet. Elena looked at the camera. She was 36 years old. She had built an empire from $4,000 and 30 years of her grandmother's belief in her. She had walked into a boardroom and extended her hand and been looked through like glass. She had taken that moment, that small, ugly, cowardly moment, and turned it into this. She was calm. She was clear. She was standing on ground that was still here, because she had stayed. "I already said everything I needed to say," she said, "when I withdrew that check." She turned away from the camera. Rachel placed the ceremonial shovel in Elena's hands. Both hands, careful and deliberate, the way you pass something sacred. The wood handle was smooth and cold. Elena set the blade against the frozen earth. She drove it in. The cameras flashed. Reverend Odenwald bowed his head. Matty looked at the sky. Rachel stood with her hand pressed over her heart, watching the ground that her grandmother's tomatoes had grown in get turned over into something new. Elena Maddox stood in the cold Chicago sun, with dirt on her shovel, and she looked exactly like what she had always been. Someone who never needed their approval to build something that lasts. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.